I have been looking forward to today's episode for a very long time. I remember back in 2003 when Entourage first debuted on HBO. It very quickly became one of my favorite shows at the time, and even almost 20 years later is still one of my favorite shows that has ever aired, that has ever been captured on film. I am honored today to have Entourage's creator, writer, and director joining me today on the Steve Freeman podcast. Doug Ellin is here, and we've got a great show for you.
You're listening to the Steve Freeman podcast, the real, raw truth about the pursuit of success in music, business, and life. Here's your host, hit songwriter, multi-platinum selling producer, and serial entrepreneur, Steve Freeman.
He is the creator, the writer, director of probably one of my most favorite TV shows of all time. It is my pleasure to welcome to the Steve Freeman podcast today, Doug Ellin. Doug, thank you so much for being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. I have to say, I don't remember, maybe because I was following Action Park Media, who you're adorning the hat of today, the podcast network that Kevin Connolly has started. And I saw Victory, the podcast going up, and I was like, all right, I'm such a huge Entourage fan. I'm going to listen no matter what. And I was instantly hooked. And it made me literally go back and start watching Entourage from season 1, episode 1, the pilot, all the way through to last night. I finished season 8 again and watched the movie. And it was so cool because I noticed things the second time around that I didn't notice the first. And I want to get into all of that with you. But first, man, thanks for taking the time. I appreciate you being here. And I want to know how you got started in the business, man.
I graduated Tulane in New Orleans and honestly got rejected from every law school. That was my plan. I had nothing to do with the movie business. I dreamt of it, but I didn't know anybody in it and had no idea. So a couple of people thought I was mildly amusing, said I should do stand-up comedy. And I told my parents I'm moving out to LA and I'm going to start doing stand-up comedy, which that did not go over very well with them after they spent all this hard-earned money on college. And we went from there and had some lucky breaks. I made some short films. I went to the American Film Institute for a year and, that was it. So, this business requires a few things. Obviously, you need some talent, but you need a lot of persistence and a lot of luck. And I was fortunate to have at least 2 of those things. So,
well, hey, dude, sometimes all you need is one of those things.
That's true. That is true.
Well, how did the whole Entourage thing come about? I mean, I know a little bit about this because I've listened to every episode of the podcast, so I know. But for those that don't, how did the show come about?
So again, Tulane connection, New Orleans. My friend, my manager at the time was also Mark's manager. I knew Mark for years before. And I made 2 movies and sold a bunch of scripts. And they came to me one day and said, Mark follows his friends around with a camera. They're a funny group. We think there's a show here. They really hadn't done a TV show. I think they might have done one before that. A network sitcom or something, but and then kind of left it up to figure it out. So there wasn't quite a fully fleshed idea, but we knew it was okay. It's kind of a street kid like Mark, and let's build it around that and his friends making it in Hollywood. So I asked Mark. I said, I want to use what I can of you, but obviously if I'm going to write this, I need to use my own experiences. And that's why we switched them to New Yorkers from Boston. And I kind of did a hodgepodge of his friends and my friends, and then started using a lot of my life experiences. And Mark was obviously very supportive of it. And that's where it went.
Yeah, it's like watching it back through, because I think I was 25 or 26 when the show aired, and somewhere around there. And I remember watching that first pilot episode and just being captivated, because I don't know that there had ever been another show that kind of really took you behind the scenes of Hollywood and showed the real day in and day out and the struggles of people that are trying to make it, but also what goes on at the upper echelons of the business, but with the agents and with the managers. And how much reality did you try when you were writing these characters, and how much of that reality was it important to you to show people on the other side?
Yeah, I mean, it was essential to me. And, it's weird because of the podcast, I'm looking back at the show, which I haven't watched in years. And everything that I did was, we're going to be real before we're funny. And there were a lot of times, and I like that you say you're getting things on the second time, because I used to write things that people would go, that's so inside, nobody's going to know what you're talking about. I said, well, they'll figure it out because this is how they talk. This is how it is. And they'll get it or they won't. So that was really important. The most unrealistic thing probably about the show is, groups of guys don't hang out like this as they get older and older and older, and don't care about each other quite as much. Most of the real entourages have a much more either business aspect to them or kind of a, masochistic control aspect of it. So I kind of took how my group of friends grew up, which was different than Mark's actual crew. I made them like childhood friends and basically relatives and a family. So that was one of the challenges also, like, okay, it's 8 years of these guys like hanging out all the time. And even, which I have a daily text with my 15, 16 best friends from high school, elementary school even, which is pretty crazy. But if we were all in the same city, we would never hang out every day like this at our ages. So, but the Hollywood aspect of it was very important to make it as realistic as it could be. And I think the combination of the two is what worked, because there were some Hollywood shows before Action and such, which was a funny show, but really didn't focus on what was the most interesting thing to me was the friendships and the loyalty and the coming up with a group of guys that knew you before it all happened. So,
yeah, because there's not a lot of loyalty in our business. I'm more on the music side of it, but there's no loyalty here. I've always said that the music business is very much a we business. I mean, a me business. It's not a we business. And, one of the things I wanted to ask you was, and this is one of the things I got going back and watching again for the second time completely through, basically in one setting. I think I finished all 8 seasons in the movie in like a week and a half. So I was really binging this shit. Getting in there. One of the things I noticed was, and then listening to the podcast helped tremendously, but did you start to notice that the dynamic you were writing on the page for these 4 guys and, extended 5 for Jeremy Piven and everybody else, did that dynamic start to leave the page and start to create a dynamic between you and the individual actors? Because that's what I started noticing after listening to the podcast and going back and watching all the episodes again. Marrying those two things together, it almost seemed like you guys became a real life entourage outside of the show.
Well, I mean, I think, Jeremy's kind of separate because, he was the agent and he was the Chicago guy. But I wanted to cast people who were like my best friends growing up, and I did. So really from minute one, the 4 of them and adding me in as kind of older and the boss. But we really did gel from minute one. So, and even when we started the podcast again, which I speak to Kevin, Jerry and Kevin all the time anyway, but we don't hang out that much. We've got our separate lives and doing things, but it is exactly like high school. When we get back together, it's like no time has passed. We've got so many stories we want to tell. And we kind of all view the world from that kind of working class New York thing that we had. So there were a lot of elements of the guys that somehow I had kind of written in the pilot and then just used whatever they brought to it as we went along. But they were... And I say this all the time, those 4 guys were the perfect guys. There was no other options. It wasn't like, it could have been this guy. Like I never think about the show and go, can you imagine we got this guy? I think we got the perfect guys and it still works. And you can hear on the podcast, because I think what a lot of people say about the podcast is it feels like the show, which is a cool compliment. It's also depressing because I killed myself to make those scripts on the show, and the podcast is like a joy. It's like we walk in, we talk, and we have a good time. But that really was what I wanted from the show to get go. As much as the Hollywood stuff interests me, that wasn't the key. It was the way I really sold it, which was, pre The Hangover. There was in 2003, there was nothing on TV where guys talked like guys that I knew. Now, I know that's a bad thing in 2020. Now they're animals and you're not allowed to talk like they talk, but they were good guys. They just happened to have mouths, that whatever. The locker room talk has kind of been ruined from what the president said, but locker room talk of guys who aren't predatory and are good guys, but actually still, like to have fun. So that was the key to it for me.
Well, that was one of the things I did want to ask you, going back after watching the entire thing again. I in my mind, I was like, this show could never be made now the way that it was made then. And and I'd like to get a little bit of your insight on this, because I don't think it's because it's socially unacceptable or cancel culture or any of that. But it seems to me that a lot of people, just normal, everyday people, have a very difficult time now telling the difference between a caricature, somebody playing a role on TV, and the actual person themselves. And I think that would cause a show like this, no matter how great it is, you just can't even hardly be real on film anymore.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an interesting question. And actually, today on our podcast, Larry Charles, who, if you don't know who he is one of the greats who Seinfeld, Curb Your Enthusiasm, Mad About You. He directed Borat. He directed The Dictator. He directed Bob Dillon in Masked and Anonymous. And we discussed all of this. And art is a time and a place. And Entourage was one of the most critically acclaimed shows on TV when it came out. New York Times said it was the best show on TV. We were nominated for Emmys and Golden Globes every year. But now a certain sect of people look back and go, oh, now you say, could it be written today? Of course it would be written today. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't write the same way, not because I was worried about the culture, but because the culture has shifted. But in 2003, that was very, very realistic to what the culture was. And separate and apart thought is, and again, I don't find it like I was never writing trying to offend anybody anyway, but they're characters. And when you watch Goodfellas, if Joe Pesci makes a racial slur, you don't think Joe Pesci is a racist. Right. You think they're examining a certain group of people and how they were. And that's the same thing to me. But, listen, I'm 52 now. I have 2 kids, and the world has changed. And it's some of it is horrible. Some of the over, doing that to people. But comedians, writers, and artists, I wouldn't say they adjust, but they reflect the culture and the time that it's at. And, right now it's like, Dave Chappelle's one of the few guys who's able to voice, the concerns that everybody has in a way that doesn't offend. It doesn't offend people because he's so good and he's so brilliant at it. But you can look back at stuff 20 years ago, stuff that I 30 years ago was obsessed with, Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor, stuff I grew up on, and now go, oh my God, this is fun. But the truth is that was a reflection of the time, and you adjust for it. And some things last forever, which of course I hope Entourage does. But I understand how the times have shifted. And if it was starting today, it would definitely be written differently. Not because, I was forced to, but because my mind and the culture is different. But, one of the things about Entourage is the time people always said how prescient we were, how on ahead of the curve we were. And we were. And that's not to brag. That's not to do anything. But you need to watch it and remember it was 2003 to 2011, 12, and the world's a different place. So.
Well, it's like watching it back. I was even in my head. My wife was watching some of it with me, and because I remember that was appointment viewing for us on Sunday night. And, you know, it's back before we had kids, and we were watching some last night. It's like, man, the lines that would come, and it's like, couldn't say that today. And it, not that it's not funny or not that I of course, you would have to go really way out there to offend me. But as a creative, as a writer, do you find that creatively suppressive, the way that things are today?
I think there's certain things going on that are, but when reflecting on Entourage, I don't at all, because the truth is today in the work environment, you would never speak that way. But 15 years ago, people did. So you wouldn't write it because it would be like we talked about earlier. It would be unrealistic to have someone talk the way they did. Again, my feeling is, since it was a, you know, comedy drama a little bit, but a comedy, you know, they were characters. And even like, you know, Ari's abuse of Lloyd, you knew at the end of the day, he loved the guy. And you knew he was a big mouth, but he would always show up for him. That being said, if it was 2020 and he spoke that way in the office, I mean, he'd be on the cover of the Hollywood Reporter the next day. His career would be over, and that would be it. So it's hard for me to even, you know, it's not something I would ever even waste my energy defending, because like I said, it spoke to the time. It was successful and it worked, but we're in a place where we've evolved, which, you know, that's great, because nobody should speak like that in a work environment, you know, but it was, again, Ari was not my reflection of what life should be like. He was based on a lot of people in Hollywood that a lot of people recognized. So in some level, you can dismiss Entourage as a very silly show or whatever the fuck you want. But again, at the time, you can read articles from major critics that were like, this is really realistic. This is how it is. And a lot of the Hollywood agents, which was always a compliment to me, were like, you fucking nailed this. This is like our lives. So it's not, and I don't even like to say the word artist, because I don't consider myself an artist. I really don't. It's like, I'm not David Simon. I'm not David Chase. I'm not Larry David. I wish I was. But what I did was the best of my ability to reflect the world as I saw it at the time. And really, people thought we did. So to revise that now is the only thing that bothers me. It's just stupid, you know? And there's a lot of people out there that'll just go, oh, this was some woman hating show. It wasn't. Like, I was very specific in that show to make sure these guys, they talked like idiots, but really, especially like Turtle and Drama, who had most of the lines, they didn't get girls on the show. So they were just talking. They were just impressing their boys. And that's young men. And, you know, listen, if young men today, which I don't hang around with a lot of 18 to 25-year-old men, if they've learned how to talk gentler and kinder, that's great. That should be what it is. But I obviously have. But again, it's more about, no one would talk like that in an office today and get away with it. So I wouldn't write it like that. Not because I thought I offended someone with a line. So.
Well, and I'll tell you, it was very evident, and I'm sure you've noticed it, but I noticed it big time, and it's really fresh on my mind. You can notice that from season 1, episode 1 through the movie. You even addressed part of this in the show through seasons, later part of season 6 into season 7. You can even look at the language that was written that you wrote for the film and see how in 2015, well, at that time, 2000, probably 13, 14, you were writing. The film came out in 2015. Even Jeremy Piven and the Ari character was toned down for that time, because so much had progressed since 2003 in the culture.
Yeah, it definitely was. But I'll tell you, because it is interesting, because the culture sometimes moves when you don't even see it. And the movie, which I'm glad you pointed out, was written almost 2 years before it came out. And the Me Too movement really started happening about 6 months to 18 months after the movie, like the real official, you know, it's out there. But the truth is, it was there. And like I said, the 8 years of the show, we were ahead of the curve. The movie might have been a little behind, because the backlash was kind of shocking to me. I really didn't understand it, because there's nothing worse, and like you say, maybe less in the movie than there was in the show. And again, the show wasn't considered like a raunchy, disgusting show. It was considered an intelligent, smart, funny show at the time. So the movie, I remember even, Emily Ratajkowski on the movie saying there were a couple of things that offended her. And I was like, oh, okay. And I kind of toned them down. But what I didn't realize is this shift was happening. And if you look at the last 5 years, the shift has been much bigger than even the previous 25 years. And
totally.
There are movies now that I have watched literally 250 times in my life that when I watch them today, and I had watched them 5 years ago even, they make me go, whoa. Like, people are going to be offended by this. And there's no way as a thoughtful, decent human being, not that you're offended by it, but not that it doesn't make you pause for a minute. Simple movies like the greatest comedies of all time, Airplane, I could name 100 of them, The Jerk. You go, wow, this is going to be a thing. So there has been a real shift, more than I think in any previous time before. And it'll be interesting to see how that pans out, because to take away some of the great comedies of all time because they say something that, may offend you now would be tragic. But it's also important to look at what it is and people to discuss the culture and today, and I have a 16-year-old daughter. So even, as I've grown in my own self, like I said earlier, I would never write a lot of that stuff just because it wouldn't happen. But I think that it's important for artists or just even low-level comics, whatever, to stay true to who they are and what they see, because those are the people. And again, I'm older now, but it's the young people who are usually ahead of the curve. And Lenny Bruce, when he was doing stand-up and cursing, people are like, what the hell is this? Andrew Dice Clay. But you push the envelope and you end up creating movements and stuff. And hopefully, each generation gets a little better, a little more thoughtful, but you still are able to appreciate what was in the past,
Oh, totally. Do you think, and I mean, I do want to get into talking about the podcast, but do you think, are you seeing a resurgence of a new generation of fans that are currently coming up and living in the culture we're talking about as it is right now, but because of the new HBO Max and the new streaming services, a new generation of people are going back and discovering Entourage and having to filter that through what's acceptable and not acceptable now, but loving the show despite where culture may be today and discovering it?
I do feel like this pandemic has had a resurgence. And by the way, and that, whatever they want to say or not, I don't feel like HBO is put it out there at all. I feel like they're almost hiding it, like they're embarrassed, which of course annoys the shit out of me. We were nominated for like 47 Emmys. We won a Peabody Award, which is like, that's a speaking about the culture. That's like, when we got that, I was like, wow, I can't believe we're getting a Peabody. But I think the young people I speak to, which it's interesting, they don't find anything offensive about it. And they still kind of feel like this reflects them and their boys. Again, forgetting the Hollywood aspect, because I've never felt that most people, that was the thing. Most people that I've ever spoken to, including women, it was about friendship, loyalty, and respect. And that was, at the end of the day, what they took away from it. So, yeah, I do feel like there's been a resurgence. And that's why we decided to do the podcast now, even though, again, I don't want the podcast to be Entourage. I want it to feel like the show and my voice and our voices is how they've progressed in this time. And hopefully when you listen to it, you feel like, again, that's me and my friends, women, men, whatever. That's what I'm going for. So,
no, and it comes across that way too. I was trying to describe it to someone yesterday. My buddy, Reggie Ham, he's a 5-time CSAC Songwriter of the Year. He's one of the best songwriters in the country. And I didn't know, he's nice. Like, he goes, I was telling you were coming on. He's like, oh my God, that was one of the best, well-written TV shows of all time. It was one of my favorites. And I had no idea he was such a huge Entourage fan. And that's exactly what we were talking about. He didn't know about the podcast. I'm like, oh, you got to go listen, because not typecast, but what the podcast does so effectively is show you behind the characters that were in the show. Yeah. It's not about the show. It's about how making the show, writing the show, living those moments in time affected each of the individual real people playing those characters. And it's all with the backdrop of the show.
Yeah, and that's really, it's a chance for us to, because I do feel there's been this weird backlash, which is, annoying. And actually, we're gonna have Jordan Belfort on in the next couple of weeks, who's the Wolf of Wall Street. And, when the movie was coming out, I saw an early cut of the Wolf of Wall Street with Jordan. And I was like, oh my God, we're tame. Like, because I was worried. I was like, and by the way, my brain was always like that. And if you watch the show, there was so much less nudity than the young guys who used to message me wanted. They were like, where's this? And that was because of me, because I didn't want that. Now, vulgar language, maybe some people consider as bad or as sex, but weirdly enough, violence, that's not considered bad. Watching somebody, murder people on the street, that's fine. So, but Jordan, one of the really interesting things was, and again, I'm not fucking Scorsese, I get it, but that movie, in my opinion, was a straight up comedy. That was and a brilliant comedy. So, and it had a lot of similarities to Entourage as far as I'm concerned, but that was critically acclaimed as the greatest thing. And nobody's talking about, he's putting a straw up a hooker's ass in his office, but that's okay because he's going to be arrested and it's a true story. I don't know, but it's something to think about and look at. And again, the PC police, have really gone to extremes to attack different certain things. And that's not to say people who have abused people who have, treated people shitty in their work environments or whatever, don't need to be called out for that. That's very different than going back and looking at what someone wrote as characters and people and going, well, is that what they thought? Because of course it isn't, Right. I mean, I had 50, 100 characters on the show. They're not all me. There were some reflections of me in a lot of characters, but, that's not what it's about. So the podcast gives us a chance to talk about all that stuff. And, we go into everything from Kevin Dillon on Platoon. There's lines in Platoon now that they'll go, ooh, that's uncomfortable. I'm not going to say it out loud now, but he was a character and he shouldn't have to explain that, apologize for it, or do anything else. So.
Well, and that's one of the things that I got to be honest, watching through again, when I learned about the podcast and started listening, I didn't realize or remember that Victory really was that prominent in the show. And watching it through the second time around, it was like, okay, well, now I know, I remember that, of course, but now I know why because it really was. I mean, it's one of the last words that's spoken in the entire franchise. And it really did sum everything up. But are the plans for the podcast? I know you guys are kind of breaking it out episodically as the episodes went, filtered in with former cast members and guests, writers like Larry Charles is on today's. Is that the plan to move forward through each episode through the seasons?
Well, I got Kevin Connolly's the producer now. It's great because I'm just talent, and now they have to deal with me as opposed to what I had to deal with for 10 years with these actors. But Kevin thinks we have to kind of frame it like that. It was his idea, the whole thing. So I'm going with that. But I'm trying to move as far away from that as possible, as quickly as possible. Because again, I'm far more interested in us talking about our lives, our careers, our whatever it is. But we're going to keep talking about those. But hopefully when we're done with the episodes, people are still interested in it because I love getting together with these guys and whoever we bring on and talking about whatever it is, even this type of stuff, So that's the fun thing for me. I don't like to look back as much as maybe some people want to, but it's been a good time. So.
No, I can tell you by listening, I can tell you driving it that way. I can see it becoming, because I know you can hear the show start and you'll hear Connolly He's constantly trying to bring it back to the title of the episode. And you're like, well, no, especially the platoon thing. And you're like, no, let's go deep. Let's talk about, so that's but you know what, though? I think one of the things that the podcast is doing very effectively, in my opinion, is getting people just as interested in Doug Ellin, Kevin Dillon, Kevin Connolly, and the others as they were their characters on the show. And I think that's
what I'm hoping for. And I'm also hoping, one of the interesting things about the show, which I obviously we talked about on the podcast, so you heard it, but when it first started and these guys weren't famous, people thought it was an unscripted reality show. They didn't really know what was going on, which was obviously a compliment because I did spend so much time making the words work. But E, who is the most based on me, there's a little Ari in me, and not the vulgar side, but his wife was based on my wife and my first wife, and his son was played by my son. But I've always said Kevin Connolly is one of the funniest people I know, and might have been the funniest actor behind the scenes. And, he always felt like he was playing the straight man because that's how I wrote it for him. So to me, Dillon, obviously, we all know how funny he is. So I think it's a great chance for everybody to kind of reinvent themselves. And now in this day and age where you obviously know you have a podcast along with, what your primary career is. So it is a chance to brand yourself in a certain way and get people interested in what your angles are and what you have to talk about. So that's also a fun part of it. But the truth is, again, I told Kevin, I said, this is, to me, I've always wanted to do a radio show, a talk show or whatever. And this was a chance. It's not, we haven't spent a nickel on advertising. It's not an attempt to make money. It was really a chance for us to get in there and see if we had something to say. And so far, it's been a lot of fun. So,
well, one more thing I want to say about the show, then I want to find out what your plans are and what you're going to be doing in the future. But one of the things that I noticed that really hit me like a ton of bricks watching the entire thing through again. And I want to know if you consciously did this, because when I watched it as the show was airing, I always thought that Adrian's role was the star, that the show was centered around Adrian and he was driving. Watching it again, actually, he was the last and the least person that I found driving the show. It was Connolly's character. It was E, to me, that drove this show, and that everything was really around him.
Yeah, from second one, the show was, and I don't want to say was a big plan, because I wrote very made it up as I went along, which was a difficult process, rather than David Simon, who was somehow able to figure out all of his seasons before he started. I wish I could have, but the one thing was, it was E's show. I mean, he was the guy coming in from, Sabaros, the street kid, regular guy walking into this world. And we were going to watch the show through his eyes. Now, obviously, every character got their shots and we grew as we went. But he was always the lead. And, early on, when talking about Adrian, I mean, HBO never thought we could even cast a movie star. So when we used to talk about it before the casting process started, they were talking about, let's do it, where we just see the movie star's feet, which it's so bizarre to even think about that. But it was a real challenge casting Adrian. And Adrian is so underrated for what he was doing. It's always bothered me, because the second he got on the camera, you actually believed he's a movie star. And I can assure you there's less than 20 people on the planet Earth that you could say that about from second one. And he was perfect for the role and delivered in my head great. But he wasn't given the big funny moments, and he wasn't given some of that. So, people might have reacted to that. But yeah, it was definitely centered around, seeing this show through the regular guy, the most relatable regular Joe that could be. So,
I do have another question, if you can tell me.
Yeah.
How much fucking money did Turtle make on the Avion deal?
Yeah, you know what? Avion,
yes.
It's funny. I remember when Dice was doing it, he just couldn't say Avion. I'd be like, Avion, but because that was my friend's company that actually started. I called him up. He's a business guy. I said, I need an idea for Turtle. What's a good business? He said, I started a tequila company. I said, great, let's do that. But I'm rewatching the show as we go along. I don't even remember. I know the house in the movie, if it was in Malibu, would probably be 30 million plus. So that might have been.
And then he offered to give Vince the $8 million to finish Hyde.
Yes, but by the way, not completely unrealistic. I mean, my friends sold Avion for a couple of $100 million.
Wow.
My friends who started Casamigos sold it for $1 billion in less than 3 years. So that even wasn't that unrealistic. But that house, which was not actually in Malibu, that might have been a little bit of a stretch for Turtle at the time, and giving out $8 million like nothing. But
Yeah, it was awesome. I going back through, I knew that I loved it at the time, but what you guys are doing with the podcast is effectively working, because even though I watched it all 8 seasons and the movie when it came out, but watching it again, it just reminds me, I got to say, and I think that the Ari Gold character will probably go down, whether people find it offensive or not, as probably one of the best written and acted performances ever captured on film.
Yeah, I mean, people forget he won 3 straight Emmys, I think, and 2 or 3 straight Golden Globes. Very rare, and again, yes, he won. I consider this a win for all of us. But yeah, I mean, Piven, I wrote the initial outline for Jeremy because I loved him from Larry Sanders. And it's weird to look at the whole landscape of the Larry Sanders Show was a big influence on me. And whoever hasn't seen that, one of the top 5 sitcoms of all time.
Totally.
But Bob Odenkirk played the agent.
Yes.
And again, this is before I'm in Hollywood and understand any of this shit. I'm like, this guy, he killed me. And when I first started conceiving of the agent, it's weird because I loved Bob so much, and Jeremy was a writer. And by a writer, I mean he played a writer on the Larry Sanders Show. And there was something about Jeremy's energy, Bob's inspiration, and the whole Larry Sanders Show that made me go, Jeremy Piven is the guy for this. So while the 4 other guys we searched for, Jeremy was the guy I wanted and went after. So that was, and I told Jeremy at the time, because he didn't know who I was or who any of the cast was. And I said, the only thing that I can tell you for certain, I don't know why, but I know how to write for you. And from scene 1, it just popped. So.
Well, it really did. Who was your, if you can, who was your favorite character to write for on the show?
Well, the big jokes, obviously Drama and Ari could just get away with so much. So they were the easiest. Vince and Turtle to some degree, but Vince and Eric were the most challenging because I was always trying to keep them as real as possible. So they were the toughest, but it always seemed like Ari and Drama just flowed out of me. I could write, for days on that. So.
Yeah, it was like I said, going back and watching it was just unbelievable. I do want to make sure everybody knows Victory, the podcast. It's available everywhere you get your podcast, Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, everywhere. You have to go check it out. It did exactly what I think you guys, it made me want to go back and watch it. My original plan was to go back and do it week by week as you guys were doing it. I couldn't stop myself. Once I started, it's like I just couldn't put it down.
Well, I love that feeling. And, I like to think we were one of the first original binge shows because I really did. It was a concerted effort to make the show as quick and as fast as possible and leave people wanting more. That was my goal. And I used to cut it so tight that sometimes my editor or producers would say, I think we could go longer. And I'd be like, no, I want it to end. And I want people to go, fuck, I wish it was still going. And we're trying the same thing with the podcast. I don't want to bore people. I want it to be a quick, fun ride, hopefully for the podcast. Driving in your car and you're like, shit, that was a quick 30 to 45 minutes. So that was definitely the plan.
Well, I remember back then I was so frustrated, and we tried my publisher, everybody. We tried everything that we could do because I was writing songs for the show True Blood, and they were featuring a lot of my shows. And I was like, listen, Fuck all these other shows. I want something on Entourage. Get me something because that's cool. This other shit isn't cool. And it never happened. But the music, I do want to add, music played a very important character in this show. Whether it's the artist that you guys chose, whether it was Snoop or Eminem or a lot of other artists. But the music played a character in this show. And I will say that it was also one of I remember Entourage being one of the first things that up until that point, even Grey's Anatomy at that point was not letting the songs and music serve as a character in the show to drive the story, mark the time in which it's being shot and filmed. And you guys really, to me, led that front.
Yeah, I mean, it was essential to me from day one. I wrote songs into the original script. Again, you can see as the show progresses how the music gets younger. And that was, I brought a friend of mine in who wasn't even in the business, but Scott Venner, who's a great music supervisor. Like, it's funny because, we'll have him on the podcast, but even the original opening titles I wrote as Funk 49, Joe Walsh. And I mean, so many different things. Eminence Front, was in the script, but, Scott came in and I'm a classic rock guy. Not that I don't love, every genre of music, but there was a lot of classic rock. And Venner, even in the pilot, because he wasn't even in the business, but we were sitting in a car and he played me the new Jay-Z album and I heard Lucifer. And instantaneously I said, this is before we shot. I said, this is the last song of the pilot. I know it. And still Scott didn't really become the guy for... when I get him on the podcast, we'll talk about exactly when, but season 3 or 4, we really just said, okay, you go now. But Scott, and again, I love the music I picked from the Allman Brothers to, whatever it was. But Scott really came in and brought this fresh year of youth and classic hip hop as well. And even classic rock, which was weird because he used to make so much fun of me in classic rock, and Led Zeppelin is Led Zeppelin's my favorite band of all time, but I didn't see it for the finale of the series. I was like, we need a great song. And all of a sudden Scott comes with, Going to California by Led Zeppelin. I was like, you're suggesting Led Zeppelin now after all this? And then he went out and got it and it was fucking amazing. So, but music from second one was essential to me. And we were fortunate enough because I look back at the music and the amount of money that, HBO allowed us to spend was huge and really gave the show such, a great vibe. So, well,
and that was really the infancy of sync for episodic television for HBO. So, I mean, that was a whole new. I remember being on our side of it. And we're like, what? HBO's going to do? I mean, yes, please. We want our music in. We started writing specifically for shows, and it was like a gold rush, and it was awesome to see that time period. And I think Entourage played a huge part in that, in seeing more music used in television shows to be more of a character and not just something in the background.
Yeah, and obviously I was very influenced. Again, I'm not Scorsese, I get it, but needle drop music. I was very big on, I don't want score. I want the right song at the right moment because, really even though I stole it, we used Monkey Man in the show, but it was really more of a homage. But I can't think of Monkey Man without thinking of Goodfellas. It's impossible. And there's so many songs like that in my past. So that's what I wanted for the show. And, it's great that we were fortunate enough to get the budget and to get, when the show started taking off, to get, musical people like Scott Venner got Kanye. We released The Good Life. It was never played before the show. And things like that started to happening when in the beginning it was we can't get anything. So,
no, it was great. It like I said, I saw so many more things watching the series completely through the second time. It just blew me away. Tell me, what are you working on now? What's next?
So I just finished a script with Thierry Henry, great football player from France.
Is there a part in it for me, bro?
We might find something. You're very good at this. I've been doing that was one of my favorite lines from the whole show is every time. You think there's a part in there for me, bro? I loved it. Yeah, Dillon. I mean, I do take a lot of credit for the writing, but I talked about that on the podcast, which is a line from the pilot. And it was like Dillon just brought 50 different levels of layers to a line that I just thought was amusing. And it became a kind of really helped build that character as this sad, desperate, broken guy, but who's a good guy, but you can relate to. Everyone can relate to, the more successful brother, friend, whatever it is. So, that was good. But, I just finished 2 scripts, but we'll see. I mean, like, as I said, it was a grind, and I enjoy a lot of it, but there was a lot of it I didn't. And doing shit like this is far more enjoyable to me than sitting in a room by myself trying to figure out scripts, So we'll see though. But I got a couple of things in the works, and who knows what life brings.
No, that's the truth. Well, man, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I appreciate you.
Wait, I got to take up 2 minutes of your time, though.
The floor is yours.
I mean, we talked before we got on here, and you said you had to go for a smoke. And, I'm a fucking judgmental Jew. I got a lot of friends who, just can't quit smoking, and they did finally. You got to check out the Kerry Gaynor method. Jerry Ferrara quit on it, and numerous other people that swore they could never quit. And I know you got a 16, 17-year-old daughter, right?
Yeah, 17-year-old, a 13-year-old.
You got to quit. My mother passed away from lung disease, and, cigarettes are just fucking bad. But anyway, I want you to check this out. My friend Andrew Shack's got this company. People swear by it. And I'm not trying to sell anything. He's going to take care of you for free. You check in with him, and if it works, you'll spread the love, because I think it's something, especially in this time. Right now, we're dealing with this lung virus, and I think, it's important for us to all be in as good a shape as we can be,
No, I appreciate that. I was telling you, it's like, I remember wanting to smoke, and it's now, I've been smoking 30 years, and it's like, I don't want to smoke anymore. And yeah. Like we were talking about with the virus and everything else, and just being healthy, because I want to live another 45 years. So
yeah, and you want to live them well. You don't want to live them, And again, it's not to put a fear in you, but I watched my mother on an air breathing mask for almost 2 years, 24/7 pretty much, and there's nothing worse. And it's also, we were talking about earlier before we got on about this getting healthy. I'm like an addictive eater. I really am. I'm not a heavy person, but I eat whatever it is. It's my comfort thing. I'm working on no sugar right now, which is makes you grumpy, but you feel better and you feel more energized. And I just think it's important, and we owe it to our families and everybody else to try to be as healthy as we possibly can be,
No, I completely agree. And I appreciate you telling me about that. Text me the whole thing, and I will reach out to them today. And I appreciate you for that. Definitely. And
got it.
I'm back and forth to LA all the time. You got to let me buy dinner for coming on and doing this, and
low sugar dinner. But yeah, you can buy that. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'll take you somewhere where there's no sugar.
Yeah, exactly.
In-N-Out Burger is out.
Yeah, well, I think the burger, you can get the all protein one.
Oh, that's right. That's right. They've got the unbelievable
bun,
burger.
The ketchup. It's not easy, but and again, I've just started this, so I don't want to act like I'm so I know how hard it is to quit different addictions. But anyway, I appreciate it. This was fun.
Yeah, man. Everybody go check out Victory, the podcast. It's available everywhere that you get your podcast. You can find Doug at Mr. Doug Ellin on Instagram. Go check him out and follow him there. Follow along with what's going on with the show. Go listen to the podcast. And if you're not already, you can catch every season of Entourage. It's available now on the various streaming platforms, but you can get it on HBO Max with your subscription. Like Doug said, I will admit it was a little hard to find. I had to fucking go in and spell the entire goddamn thing out.
They're not pushing us out.
No, they're not. But go find it if you've never watched the show, which I can't believe anybody has. But if you haven't, literally one of the best shows ever put out, ever filmed. And Doug, I appreciate you taking the time and being here with me today.
Thanks a lot. Stay safe. Be good.
What an honor for me. That I want to, again, thank Doug for taking the time out and being here. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Hope you learned more about the show, the characters, kind of the mindset behind somebody that has created something that will live forever, like the show Entourage. Doug, I mean, he thought about it. He created it. He wrote the episodes. He directed many of them, including the Entourage, the feature film that came out in 2015. Plus, good to hear about some of the different process of how things were then and how things are now and how different they are. Because honestly, like we talked about, I don't know that that show could ever be made again, but I'm certainly glad that it was made once. So my heartfelt thanks and gratitude for Doug coming on the show and spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed the episode as well. Don't forget to follow me on social media at The Steve Freeman on all social media outlets. If you would like to join my email list, you can do that at thestevefreeman.com. I'm going to put links to some different stuff, whether it's HBO Max or whether it's Victory, the podcast. All those links are going to be in the show notes of today's episode, so be sure and check those out. Go to thestevefreeman.com, click on show notes, and everything is right there. And I know I said it earlier, but please do go check out Victory, the podcast, with Doug Ellin and Kevin Dillon, and Kevin Connolly sneaks in there from time to time, plus previous cast members of the show. You're going to absolutely love it. Victory, the podcast, available now everywhere you get your podcast. Thank you for being here for my podcast, and I will see you again soon. But until then, keep being creative, keep pressing the boundaries, and there's nothing wrong with being independent. See you in the next episode.
Thanks for joining us for the Steve Freeman podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow Steve on social media at The Steve Freeman.